Well, good afternoon to all of you who are joining us in person here at the Kislak Center at the University of Pennsylvania, and for those who are joining us online. My name is Nicholas Herman. I'm the Lawrence J. Schoenberg Curator of Manuscripts at the Schoenberg Institute for Manuscript Studies at the University of Pennsylvania Libraries, and it's my pleasure to introduce the beginning of our introduction to our distinguished speaker tonight, Shalom Sabar from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. This is the 6th annual Schoenberg Institute for Manuscript Studies and Herbert D. Katz Center Distinguished Fellowship and Lecture for a visiting scholar here at Penn. And before we begin tonight's proceedings, I just want to alert you all who are here in person to a wonderful exhibition of Ketubah that are on display in the Lee Library, which is just behind here, and they'll be on display after the talk. And there's also a reception after the talk at sort of the other end of the floor. And so please feel free to circulate. Just bear in mind that if you come into the exhibition in the Lee Library, we ask that you don't bring any food or drink in for obvious reasons. As I mentioned, this annual lecture is a cooperative effort between the Katz Center and the Schoenberg Institute. And the Schoenberg Institute, I'll just talk about it very briefly, is what we like to call a think tank for the study of manuscript cultures in the digital age. And we do a variety of activities in addition to lecture series. We have an annual conference in November on manuscript studies in the digital age. Our upcoming conference, November 10th to 12th, here at Penn and at the Free Library, is entitled, is about manuscripts in translation and science in translation. And so we welcome you to that if you're interested, and please visit our website as well and sign up for our newsletter, our monthly newsletter, to learn more about events of the Schoenberg Institute. Now it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Natalie Dorman, who's the Associate Director of the Herbert D. Katz Center for Advanced Judaic Studies, who's going to tell you a little bit more about tonight's program.
All right. Thank you, Nick. Welcome to everybody that's in this room. Welcome to so many of you who are online. My name is Natalie Dorman, and as Nick said, I'm the Associate Director of the Katz Center. The Katz Center has had the great pleasure of partnering with SIMS, the Schoenberg Institute, to develop this initiative over the past 6 years, although with a little COVID break in there. And by SIMS, I mean all of the amazing staff here, but I want to do a special shout out to the incomparable Lynn Ransom, who has done so much work to put this together. She's in England now, can't be here, but she's here. Hopefully she's here online. We'll check later. The Katz Center is in the business of supporting the humanistic study of Jewish history and culture at the highest level. And each year we welcome 20 internationally prominent scholars to Philadelphia to participate in a research fellowship built around a common theme. We also have a really vibrant public programming outreach, all of it online. So if you're curious about that, please check our website. But this evening's event celebrates a unique fellowship in on our horizon, however, one that brings together our two institutions' finest resources, our scholars and their manuscripts. And that's the marriage that we intend to make with this fellowship series. I'm really delighted to re-echo Nick's welcome to our lecturer tonight, Professor Shalom Sabar of the Hebrew University. And Shalom is the 6th in our series, as well as being the David Ruderman Distinguished Visiting Scholar at the Katz Center. Previous SIMS Katz Fellows have shared absolutely eye-popping research with us on a wide range of manuscripts held here, from a Judeo-Arabic medical miscellany to a fire-damaged German prayer book, a business letter from a Maghrebi merchant in Egypt, to the first early modern Hebrew travel work on geography. Tonight, Professor Sabar will guide us through the trove of often lavishly illustrated Jewish marriage contracts from the collection of Benjamin Zucker, who has joined us here tonight. We're pleased to have him here. I will leave the details of Shalom's work for Arthur Curon's introduction that's coming up. But before I go, 2 quick things. One, those of you who are online, greetings. Thank you so much for coming. And we can't see you, but we do invite you to ask your questions into the chat function, and we will present them to the speaker as we can and as we have time. So please use the chat function to ask your questions. And I want to close with a few thanks. First of all, to Lynn Ransom and Arthur Quiron, who are really my partners in crime on this since the very beginning. To the staffs of the library and the Katz Center who worked so hard on this event, including putting the beautiful exhibit together. Again, please check it out if you haven't done so. And David Ruderman, who I hoped would be here tonight, but is home, who inspired the endowment of the fellowship that underwrites the fellowship from our side. And a final deep thanks to Penn's Jewish Studies program for sponsoring the talk and reception. And with that in mind, I turn to Catherine, the chair of Jewish Studies.
Thank you, Natalie. I promise you this will be really, really short in the pearl necklace of introductions. I'm Catherine Hellerstein. I'm the director of the Jewish Studies program at Penn and a professor of Yiddish in the Department of Francophone, Italian, and Germanic Studies, otherwise known as FIGS. I'm here to welcome you, it's true, to the 2022 Sims Katz lecture, as you've heard already. And since 2015, the Jewish Studies program has been happy to sponsor the Visiting Scholars public lecture, co-sponsor it, and especially to provide refreshments afterwards, which is, of course, the most important thing. No, I'm joking. But I'm just thrilled to join the chorus to welcome Shalom Sabar. And now I will introduce Arthur Quiron, who is the Schottenstein-Jesselson Curator of Judaica Collections at Penn, and he will give a proper introduction, and then Shalom will be able to deliver his talk.
Thank you, Betsy. Nice to see you. Hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Catherine. I am the Schottenstein-Jesselson Curator of Penn's Judaica Collections. I hold an adjunct assistant professorship in Penn's History Department. It's really a great honor and a pleasure to be here with Shalom and to introduce him tonight. I have to add to the thanks. I think there's some rabbinic saying that you can never say too many thanks, but I'll test the limits tonight. I have to thank Dr. Natalie Dorman, who, as you heard, is the Assistant Director of the Katz Center, and Dr. Lynn Ransom, the Curator of the Schoenberg Institute for Manuscript Studies. They're the brain trust. They're really the animating personalities that drive this remarkable 6-year partnership that we hope will continue long into the future, bringing together primary sources with great minds to teach and share new knowledge. I also want to thank Catherine, Professor Catherine Hellerstein. As she mentioned, she makes it possible for us to be well fed and get food and drink tonight, and to make this event possible, which is no small thing. I also want to acknowledge some people. I'm not sure, I didn't hear, but Steve Weitzman is the director of the Katz Center. He couldn't be with us tonight. But of course, he's played a leadership role in making this possible, as has Sean Quimby, my boss and the director of the Kislak Center, who's with us tonight. Eric Deloge, who you may not see in front of you, but he's actually, everything that's going right tonight is because of him. So he's actually here behind the scenes and in front of us. I want to acknowledge Lynn Farrington, the director of Kislak's public programs. And you heard from Nick Herman, who is the Schoenberg curator, who's been so kind to help coordinate so much of tonight's program. And I also want to give a shout out to Alita Arthurs, who is the Penn Library's manager of meetings and special programs, for all of her work organizing the reception that the Jewish Studies program is sponsoring after tonight's talk. You've heard already, but I want to acknowledge my friend, my colleague, my co-conspirator, Benjamin Zucker, whose collection of Ketubot, or Jewish marriage contracts, will be drawn upon by our speaker for tonight's talk. Spanning the 17th to the 20th centuries, the 249 Ketubot in the Zucker collection present intimate family heirlooms that are at the same time unique works of art and genealogical records. This is a really interesting subject. It's family, politics, geography, history, how they all come together through this unique specifically Jewish document, the Ketubah. The range of dates in the Zucker collection span from the 17th through the 20th centuries. The geographical expanse extends over 3 oceans and 4 continents. And I'm taking a little bit longer here, Shalom. I'm sorry to delay things, but I want to draw attention to the fact that not only will you see many ketubot from the Zucker collection, but thanks to Benjamin's generosity and the work of our colleagues in SETI, the Schoenberg Center for Electronic Text and Image, all of the collection is now fully digitized and available free and openly online for you to see. So you can go to, thank you, forgot. You can go to our OPEN, nicely named website, which is a commitment to open data, which will take you to any of the ketubot that are featured tonight. I really want to acknowledge, really profoundly acknowledge my colleagues in SETI, Chris Lipa and Andrea Nunez, who are the people who digitized the manuscripts. And they played a critical role supporting something I'm going to say about at the very end, our digital chuppah project. Now to the main event. Tonight's speaker, Shalom Sabar, is an emeritus professor of Jewish art and folklore at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He's able to be at Penn this fall in part thanks to the David B. Ruderman Distinguished Visiting Scholarship Fund, which is based at the Katz Center. When it comes to the study of the Ketubah, or Jewish marriage contract, Professor Sabar has no peer. I don't say that lightly. I thought about whether I should say this, and I truly believe that he is peerless. He is an internationally renowned scholar, teacher, and public speaker, a world authority on Jewish and folk material culture, an internationally acclaimed collector of Judaica ephemera. He's published more than 20 books and more than 250 articles and reviews. Among his book-length publications are Ketubah, Jewish Marriage Contracts of the Hebrew Union College Skirball Museum and Clow Library, and Mazal Tov, Illuminated Jewish Marriage Contracts from the Israel Museum Collection, and The Life Cycle of the Jews in the Lands of Islam. There are others, but I think these are the ones that are most pertinent to tonight's program. I'm also very happy to announce on this occasion that Professor Sabar's long-awaited study, The Art of the Ketubah, based on more than 600 Jewish marriage contracts from the library of the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York City, which you can see here, has just literally appeared. And you'll be able to buy it shortly in a hardback deluxe copy or in a paperback version. And you can be sure that we will get copies for our library. Shalom Sabar's biography, if I may add, is nothing less than extraordinary. His Hebrew Wikipedia page reports that he is the last Jewish baby born and circumcised in the ancient Neo-Aramaic speaking Kurdish Jewish community of Zakko in Kurdish Iraq, 1 month before his family emigrated to Israel in 1951. He was educated in Israel and the United States, earning his PhD in art history from UCLA in 1987, writing on the illustrated marriage contracts of the Jews in Renaissance and Baroque Italy. He is a much sought after speaker. He served as a visiting professor and lecturer in universities, museums, and public institutions in Israel, Europe, and the United States. Professor Sabar served as editor of Rimonim, a Hebrew periodical of Jewish art. He's the co-editor of Jerusalem Studies in Jewish folklore, and is on the editorial board of the periodical Pe'amim, and a multi-volume series dedicated to Jewish communities in the lands of Islam, both published by the Ben Tzvi Institute in Jerusalem. And if that were not enough, he also keeps busy guiding traveling seminars to Jewish sites in Europe, North Africa, and Central Asia. I should note that Professor Sabar has been a Katz Fellow during 2 different research years and also contributed to 2 of our online Katz Penn Library's web exhibitions. I mention this because his most recent contribution was about a ketubah from his place of birth, Zakko, of which we actually have in the Zucker collection a Ketubah from Zako from 1910. And the 1910 Ketubah in the Zucker collection is in the same hand of an anonymous scribe who 2 years later in 1912 wrote the Ketubah for Shalom Sabar's paternal grandparents, which now hangs in his living room in Jerusalem. This fascinating document is among the long overdue starting points for tonight's program that had to be postponed due to COVID in the spring of 2020. After tonight's lecture, there will be a reception, as Nick mentioned, and there is a special exhibition of a choice selection of some of the most beautiful and illuminated decorated ketubot in the Zucker collection, which will be featured in the Lee Library without food and drink when you go in there. I just again want to acknowledge and announce to you that this collection that Benjamin Zucker built over more than half a century, he's agreed to be here and to discuss the collection with you. And in addition, Chris Lippa from SETI will be here to provide a demo of what we call the Digital Chuppah Project. And what this allows you to do is to go underneath a virtual chuppah and see this very Zako Ketubah and listen underneath this virtual chuppah to Shalom Sabar reading it in his native Neo-Aramaic Israeli voice to provide you with this multisensorial experience. So I want to thank everyone who's come tonight, everyone who's joining us online, but above all, I want to thank Shalom Sabar, who bears one title, which perhaps is the highest honor of all, Mensch.
Wow. Thank you, Arthur. This was the most amazing introduction I ever got in my life. The most detailed one also. I don't do only ketubot, just to pacify you. It's not, okay, Toda Rabba. Thank you for everyone who came, to those who brought me here, and to re-meet my old friend, Benny Zucker, who I think we are like soul mates from the beginning. I mean, he was my patron, my first patron, if I can use this term, when I was just beginning student many, many years ago, almost 40 years ago. And we are still together, you see, after all these years. And it's a wonderful project that I'm very happy to work with him always. So the topic of tonight is to look at the ketubot of one community, and this is the Jews of Iran, and to look at their marriage contracts and try to see what we can learn from the contracts of this one community about their daily life, their ideologies about the visual arts, their connections with the Islamic society, and how, let's say, these documents are really, let's say, part of their daily life, but also at the same time show the high culture that they experienced. Can we dim a little bit the lights like it was before? Okay. Okay, so we are speaking of a community that is one of the oldest of the Jewish diaspora. Even if you want to be very careful, it has a history of 2,500 years, which is a very long history of a one community living in the same place over all these hundreds of years. We have testimonies from the past in continuous existence since antiquity until today, until even now, this very day. It's the largest Jewish community in an Islamic land today. And so its history, of course, is of great interest to scholars and to people who are interested in the ancient Near East, its relationship to the Bible and ancient history. So the topic has been of great interest to artists in Europe already in the Renaissance and earlier times. And I'm showing just to enter into the picture a little bit of the history of this community through the visual materials. So here we have a painting by Jean Fouquet that shows one of the most important events in the history of this community that is narrated in the Bible. And this is Cyrus giving permission to the Jews of Persia at the time to return back to the Holy Land and build their temple. So we see the king here and the elders of Judah, and even to show you that we are in Europe. I'm sorry, and now I have to learn how to use this. 1 second. One of them is even wearing the Judenhut, that is of Germany of the Middle Ages. But anyway, so the histories are confused. And here is Gustav Doré in the late 19th century that are doing the same topic. Yes, we see the temple implements that are returned by Cyrus to the elders of Judah before going back to the Holy Land and to build the second temple. And this story that is the Bible telling has found evidence in the famous Cyrus cylinder, as it's called, an item that was excavated in Mesopotamia in 1879 that doesn't mention the Israelites, but mentions many privileges that King Cyrus was giving to the people of his time, including to rebuild temples and to take people from displaced people and return them back to their countries of origin and so on. So we have a proof, you can say historical proof, not always you can find historical proofs for the events narrated in the Bible. And here is one that, of course, when it was discovered, has become a great topic of interest, and today it's in the British Library. Of course, the Bible can tell us a lot, as we're speaking 2,500 years ago, just before the beginning of the time of Jesus, a few centuries earlier. We have a story that the last story that took place in the diaspora before the Bible is sealed in the Hebrew Bible is the book of Esther. The book of Esther that is narrated about life in Shushan, in the city of Shushan. We'll see it's in a second where it is. It is according to Jewish Iranian ideology. So it's mentioned here already in this book that life in this town of Shushan and in the kingdom of Iran, of Persia, of antiquity, we can learn a lot about daily life of the Jews at that time and the relationship with the society. Many details are here that about the parties, about drinking, about anything that you of interest. That the book of Esther has many of these details are of great interest to anthropologists or folklorists. So the book of Esther is extremely important to understand again something about the understanding, the self-understanding of Persian Jews of themselves. So they took this book very seriously and actually illustrated it in several versions that we have today, especially in the city of Isfahan. We have few manuscripts that are written in Judeo-Persian. This language is sort of the parallel to Yiddish. I mean, in Eastern Europe, it's a language written in Hebrew letters, but in the Persian language, with, of course, many words in Hebrew. So, for example, in the first line here, for those of you who read Hebrew, can see the words Koresh and Esther, Cyrus and Queen Esther. And it's telling how Queen Esther, a book that is not told in the Bible, gave birth to a child. And so we see an episode of childbirth. This is Esther. She's squatting while she's delivering the baby. This is the baby. These are the midwives around there. And we can learn a lot about how children were born at that time and what they did with a childbirth, how they are washing the children. And there are only women present because childbirth took place at home and so on. So Queen Esther is giving birth to whom? To Darius. Darius, I mean, she did not get married with Ahasuerus, with the king of ancient Persia for nothing, only because she delivered this king that will later allow the Jews to return to the Holy Land and build their temple and so on. So much so that the modern book on the life of the Jews of Iran that appeared here in the United States is called Esther's Children, a portrait of Iranian Jews. Yes, because they still believe today that they are the descendants, direct descendants of Queen Esther. And so the shrine of Mordechai and Esther is visitable. You can go there today in the city of Hamadan, which, as I said, is identified by the Jews of Iran as ancient Shushan. And here is the shrine, as you can see, outside and inside. There is on the left, you see a document of visitors to this shrine that was done in the early 20th century, today in a private collection. This on the left is document. And even today, I'm showing you how it was for centuries that there was ziyarah, this pilgrimage to this tomb by the Jews who lived in Hamadan and around it. But to this day, this I took in my neighborhood in Jerusalem, in Ramot, and the bulletin board 4 years ago, maybe before Purim. Only you can buy tickets today to go and visit in the tomb of Mordechai and Esther in Iran and pray there. And like other people go to Uman, Jews of Iran prefer to go to visit the tombs of Mordechai and Esther. They are the main heroes. Now, when we come to the period from which we have our ketubot, our marriage contracts, I want to mention very briefly, because it's a big topic, how Jews were treated by the Muslims in Iran throughout the centuries. It's, as I said, it's a huge topic, and we cannot do justice to analyze it very briefly here. But just on showing you on the background of the Pact of Umar, as it's called, this pact that came to be with additions almost for 2 centuries after the beginning of Islam, that tells the position of non-Muslims that believe in the book. There's the Alil Kitab, the people of the book, as they're called in the Quran. They're given a special status as Dhimmi. Dhimmi meaning the people of the covenant, or Alil Dima. And so they are allowed to live under Islam, but have many rules that they should follow. For example, we shall not build houses overtopping the houses of the Muslims. We shall not teach the Quran to our children, and so on. This is also important here, we shall not seek to resemble the Muslims by imitating any of their garments, and the turban and the footwear, or parting of the hair, and so on. So these rules that came to be early in Islam were not followed strictly in most Islamic lands. I would say, in my opinion, at least from what I see, the historical materials that were followed mostly in Iran. In Iran, in many, especially in the last centuries, let's say from the 16th, 17th century on, where we have more and more evidence about daily life of the Jews in Iran, you can see how difficult it was for Jews to live in Iran under Islam. There were many anti-Jewish laws, whether by the rulers or by the populations, pogroms and forced conversions and looting the Jewish quarters, and many anti-Jewish rules that were, let's say, made Jewish life extremely difficult in Iran. Iran, because of that, again, that's something that should be developed more, did not produce any great rabbis. It wasn't the center of Torah learning, like, for example, Iraq or Morocco, because life there was so difficult that people hardly met living in many of the places, the centers that they lived. We are speaking basically of some major communities that today are divided between 3 countries: Iran, Afghanistan, and Bukhara, and Uzbekistan. I'm showing you, I highlighted the main towns from which also the Ketubot, the marriage contracts, come from. Tehran, the capital in late times, not always in the past. Mashhad, you can see Mashhad, about which we'll talk here. The city of Herbert, that is not far. The city of Bukhara in Uzbekistan. And basically these 3 countries today, 3 different countries, have the same culture. I would call this the Jewish-Persian realm, that they all live in one culture, from liturgical, from let's say the point of view of Jewish life, the same traditions. And actually there is a lot of movement between these towns and between these countries. For example, the Jews of Mashhad came from Herat. And when there were persecutions in Mashhad, they went to Bukhara and to Herat, and so on. So there are all the time connections between these communities, and this is also very well reflected in the marriage contracts. I also like to mention that here today in Israel, there is a periodical that is called Abba in Hebrew. Abba is Rashi Tevot, is abbreviation for Iran, Bukhara, and Afghanistan. So because these 3 communities are seen by Persian Jews today as really one with the same culture. Okay, so how Jews were shown in the arts of the time, before we go to the Ketubot, I want to show you, here is a modern Persian artist that studied in the West, and he's painting in Western style, and he has this very interesting painting of Jewish peddlers in Tehran in around 1900. So these are the two peddlers that are selling a garment to this person, to this Persian Muslim person. And you can see how poorly the two are dressed. Look at their shoes, look at the torn garment that he's wearing. Look how, let's say, neglected they are. They also must have a belt that was a sign of their Judaism. And so this artist, by, let's say, not meaning to do something exceptional, showing the reality of his time, how the Jews, even those who sell garments to rich people, are very poor peddlers. In this image that was done by a visitor to Iran, a missionary that lived in the city of Yazd in Iran for 5 years, and he wrote this book, 5 Years in Persia, that was published in 1905. There are a few illustrations in his book. This one shows the different people of Iran. Each figure here represents a different ethnic group. So who is the Jew among all this? I don't know if you can see, but let me show you enlargement. It's this figure here, and how you can recognize him. There are few things, but the one that is most interesting is that the shoes that he's wearing are of different kind. Okay, so it goes back to what I read to you in the Pact of Umar, that they should be dressed differently, so that, like we know in Europe, or similar identifying badges. So here in Iran, this was the one that immediately gave away that this is a Jew. Or in this image here, that shows another Jew, the figure that stands on the right. We show you enlargement of it. He is intellectual, he's holding a book, he is dressed as a wealthy person, he must be a rich Persian Jew of the time when this book was done. But also in his case, even though he's of the elite, his shoes are different. So you can see when you look at the detail to see that that's something that was common. Few photographs I want to show you that we have from the earliest photographs that we have from the Jews of Iran, and you can see the poverty of the children here from Yazd, which was one of the largest communities and the poorest one. Many important people in Israel today are from Yazd. For example, President Katz, for those of you who know, the chief of staff, former chief of staff that we had, and so on. Anyway, so, this community, that's how the children look like. And you look at this woman, these two women on the right, that have their jewelry, but they also walk in like the Muslim women with the covered faces and try to be protected as much as they can, because it was dangerous for a woman to go by herself, especially Jewish women, in the streets of the cities. These are the rabbis in one of the cities, Golpaigan. And again, you can look at these rabbis and can see that it's not something that you expect of rabbinical portrait, group portrait, and look how the books are housed behind them. Maybe an idea for any library here, I don't know. That's more or less how my library also looks like, but anyway, okay. And here on the wall, there is an image of Moses, and this is a carpet that we know this type of carpet from the city of Kashan in Iran. Okay, and now the change in modern times was done due to several factors. One is the change in Jewish life, and one modernization of Iran, a relative modernization. So the change in Jewish life was introduced by Alliance Israelite. Alliance Israelite, this organization that came to Iran in late 19th century and started to build schools that are modern from France. This ideology came from France, from the Jews of France to the countries in the Middle East. And they tried, you see the teacher is from Paris and the school kids are from Tehran in this picture, and they tried to introduce new methods of school, not only study Torah and Talmud, but also modern studies. The rabbis objected to that. And one of the reasons is connected to our topic. because, for example, before Alliance, children were married in Iran, Jewish children, also Muslim, by the age of engaged by the age of 7 or 8, and at 10 or 12, depending now when the first period of the girl appears, at 12 maximum they will get married. Now when Alliance came and they wanted also to have the girls in the school, the rabbis saw that their livelihood is taken away from them. Too many kids are busy studying and not getting married. So they complained to Alliance. So it's even, this is part of our story, but it will influence even the marriage contracts. Other thing is the Zionist movement that started in Iran in the early 20th century. Here is one in the Hamadan, the city of Mordechai and Esther, the Zionist activists in the city. And you see behind them, and look at this motif that is important, the Magen David, the Star of David, with the word Zion written in the center. Okay, so finally we come to the issue of marriage and the Ketubot. Do we have pictures of weddings from the past, from Iran? We don't, but we have few, and they are in totally unexpected sources, of couples, of bridegroom and the bride. And they appear, for example, the largest depository of images of like that are amulets for the wedding, because amulets, Iran is the country #1 from Jewish point of view for production of amulets, because life was so difficult, as I mentioned before. So for each occasion that they could, they produced amulets. So that's why we have today in museums and private collections the largest number of amulets that are still you can buy almost in every auction are from Iran. So these two amulets that we see are for couples at the time of the wedding. Any ritual of transition in life, it was considered dangerous, and you should protect the heroes that participate in this ritual, childbirth, wedding, and so on. And so many amulets were produced. So here we see the married couples in the Qajar period in the second half of the 19th century. Here is another unexpected source. I mentioned before the illuminated manuscripts of Iranian Jews. The artists were in most cases Muslims, but at least they give us some impression of what was on. This is a page from a manuscript that is in the Jewish Theological Seminary that tells the story of Yusuf, Joseph, and his Zulaikha, his wife, the wife of Potiphar in the Bible. And this romance written in poetry in Persian, translated into Judeo-Persian here. And we're showing the final picture of this couple. It's a very long story of their love and the adventures that they went in life, these two. But this is the final picture of their wedding, you can say, sort of. And both of them are dressed with what looks like female dress, but the figure here, this is Joseph, okay? He has the crown on his head and he's dressed in green. Green is the color of holiness, actually. And this is Zulaikha next to him, okay? And the most beautiful image of wedding that we have are just these two isolated panels that survived, and they are in the collection of Professor of Islamic Art in the Hebrew University. So here we see the bridegroom. Maybe it's done by non-Jewish artists, but the inscription in Hebrew, in Judeo-Persian. This is Arus ben Shlomo, that's his title, and he's playing this musical instrument that is called a tar, T-A-R. Okay, you see the first word in the Hebrew, for those who read the Hebrew, tar, Taf Aleph Resh, Arus ben Shlomo, and this is his bride. And she's Rachel, her name is Rachel, and she's beautifying herself, she's holding a mirror, and she's painting her eyebrows, yes? And by the way, in the Qajar style, they should be united, the two eyebrows, yes? That's the aesthetics of Iran in this period. Okay, so we finally come to the marriage contracts, and this is not Persian one, because while in the marriage contracts of Western communities, Western Jewish communities, whether it's Holland or Italy, or the Sephardi community of Hamburg in Germany, like this one, you have wedding scenes. You have bride and bridegroom. Like in this one from Hamburg, you see the wedding of this couple in the back, a Sephardi couple, It's not movable chuppah, it's a Sephardi chuppah. And so you have pictures like that. While in Iran, I can already show you the first two ketubot, you don't have human figures. So you won't ever find marriage images of this type like we see in Europe. And you have to ask yourself what these decorations have to do with the wedding. We'll try to reply that, but notice how, first of all, they're attractive and they are very large. You cannot basically see the originals later. You can see how large they are and beautifully done, and all the space is filled with decorations, but nothing, let's say, that you know immediately biblical episodes of the wedding of Rebecca and Isaac or something like that. You don't have that. You have something that is coming from decorative arts of the Islam, of the Islamic world. While again, in Europe, these two marriage contracts, the one on the right is from Rome and the one on the left from Venice. And you can see how they represent totally different world, although the text will be very similar. Okay, so where the tradition of the decoration come from and also of the text, for that you have to go to the earliest evidence that we have to the Cairo Geniza. This is the earliest evidence that we have about how marriage contracts were illustrated in the lens of Islam, Jewish marriage contracts. The Cairo Geniza that was discovered, this depository of Hebrew manuscripts in the Fustat, in the Old Cairo. And so here in this room that you see in the upper slide, all these documents were hidden until they were discovered in the late 19th century and transferred to Cambridge, Oxford, JTS, and other institutions. So here you see at the bottom one of the fragments that was discovered in the Cairo Geniza of a marriage contract that has some illustrations and some text. Yes, you can see. And some even from the Cairo Geniza have architectural decoration. This is the earliest that we see architectural decoration ketubot. Here we see the left section of an arch on this fragment, and here two arches that intersect. And below are verses about the wedding. Okay, so these features of the Cairo Geniza ketubot will be very dominant in the lens of Islam in later periods. I want to show you one more example from the Cairo Geniza, and this one that is complete because it has a wedding poem that is written at top. I won't read it to you. I don't know how many of you can read Hebrew here, but it's a wedding poem that was composed at that time for the wedding, rhyming with the syllable la, Shah Me'ula, or Na Me'ulala, Simcha V'Tza'ala, Chedva V'Gila, and so on. And then it mentions the city where the wedding took place, and it says, Fustat Mitzrayim, which is situated on the river Nile. So these features of the wedding poem at top and indicating the name of the town with the river next to it became extremely important in later periods. The water source was indicative of the place that cannot be changed. The river always would flow next to that city, and it is also a sign of fertility for the couple on the wedding night. So when we go to Iran and Bukhara and Afghanistan, we see that the same wedding poem survived in all these three communities. The contracts are 700, 800 years later than those of the Geniza, but in this ketubah from Afghanistan, from the city of Herbert, we have a wedding poem at top. I'll show you just one section of it, and it has the same wedding poem that we see in the Cairo Geniza ketubot. Ora V'Tza'ala Ve'ikar V'Gdula, the same poem is preserved centuries later, which means that the earliest ketubot that we have from Iran, although they are relatively late, have a tradition that goes back to the Middle Ages, but is lost to us because in Iran they could not save this kind of documents for centuries. We don't have anything before the 17th or 18th century from Iran, from Jewish point of view. Here is a ketubah from Bukhara, from the collection of Beni. And you can see in Bukhara, also it has the same poem. And even it mentions, although it's now 19th century, for those of you who know Jewish history, this will be surprising. It mentions the head of the diaspora, Rosh Yeshiva Shel Gola, like in the poem that we saw from the Cairo Geniza, when at that time there was a person that was the head of the diaspora, Resh Galuta. In the 19th century, it's meaningless, but it's still here to show that this really an old text that they continue to use in Uzbekistan, in Bukhara, in Samarkand, in these towns, centuries later, which shows, of course, the antiquity. And again, the same is in Isfahan. In Isfahan, around the Ketubah, at the border, there is this text that goes on that is based on this poem from the Middle Ages. Also, when you look at the text of Isfahan Ketubot, we'll deal a lot with Isfahan, and I'll explain in a second why this is so important. So here's the name of the city in Hebrew, and immediately it mentions which is situated on the river Zarin Rud, okay, the name of the river. I've never been to Isfahan, unfortunately. I'm dying to go, but here is this river that is still existing to this day with the same name. And this is just a view of Isfahan, of the madrasa, one of the madrasas in Isfahan. What is very interesting about all this Ketubot, which is different from Europe as well, of great interest, although in Europe the Ketubot of Italy, or as I said, of the Netherlands, are of high artistic value relatively, they are usually not signed, while in Iran, many Ketubot are signed, in Afghanistan and Bukhara. So here at the bottom of the contract, for those who can read the Hebrew, Hamtsayer ve'akotev, the illustrator and the writer, the scribe and the artist are the same person, and then his name is given. Yes, Moshe, son of Yeshua. Now notice something very, again, for those who follow the Hebrew, this is the name of the scribe, this is the name of his father. So the name of the father comes above. Why? Because he won't put the name of his father in the same level like him. He wants to show respect to his father. So, and the Iranian Jews are known that the respect to the father is something extremely important in this society. So the name of the father is written in the line above. Here is another example. So you see how the scribe and the illustrator introduce himself. He is a servant or slave to the person who commissioned him to do this. The humble, it says the youth, but the young man, but it means that he's humble. He is not elder person. It's again a symbol of humility. Sair vezair, that is tiny, is small, and then his name is Yeshua, son of Shmuel. The name of the father will be written above. Other features that they introduced in the text before we go to the illustrations that are of great interest are especially in the Ketubot of Herbert in Afghanistan. It's not only place, but here is the most, that it's most, let's say, clear here, that you see around the text, you have the old wedding poem here written in the arches, but around the text appear simanim, meaning good signs, and all the Hebrew letters, all of the Hebrew alphabet are used to give you good signs at the time of the wedding. Yes, going in orderly way from the Aleph till the last letter. So a sign of good light, a sign of blessing, a sign of rejoice, and so on, until you get to the end, the letter Taf, the last letter, a sign, Shin, Shalva, serenity, and Tshuva, repentance. Okay, so this is something that they invented in Herat probably, and appears in many of their Ketubot. Now, let's speak a little bit about the visual arts and how the motifs came to be. The earliest that we have illustrated marriage contracts from Iran are from the city of Isfahan. And I should mention now, because we'll deal with Isfahan quite a lot, that Isfahan was the capital in the time these Ketubot were produced. It was the capital until the end of this century, of the 18th century, when Tehran took its place. But Isfahan was the capital, even more than that. The Jews of Isfahan believe, that's their tradition, oral tradition, that they founded the city. That the city in antiquity, in Talmudic times, was founded by Jews. And the earliest evidence that we have for Jewish existence in Isfahan is from around the 4th or 5th century, archaeological evidence. The city was so much, let's say, identified with Jews that Persian historians called it Al-Yehudiya, the city of the Jews. Yes, so So we have the earliest ketubot from Isfahan that survived. Here we see two of them from the 17th and 18th century. And when you look at them, I should ask what they remind you. And the reply should be immediately carpets. I mean, the design is taken from Muslim carpets. You can see how the ketubah, the center of the contract, is actually replacement of the center section here, and the border is more or less the same. And whatever reason, if you want to decorate, you want to say that this is the new home, or to show something that is of highly aesthetic value in a Persian society, the carpet, the beautiful carpet, you illustrate it, you imitate this design. Here is another carpet to show you, even with the flourishing vase that is in the center, like in the contract. Here's, I'm sorry. So the vase here and the vase here with flowers and so on. And they have a lot of architecture, like in the Geniza Ketubot. But while in the Geniza Ketubot, it was early medieval architecture of Egypt, here we see architecture that resembles the madrasas and the mosques of Iran of the time. So for example, here is this JTS Ketubah of Isfahan, and there are many similar to it. And you can see, although it's totally flat, we don't have perspective here of 3 dimensions. So you can see the background, the architectural design here at top, and also here and here, where the birds are standing. There is something in the back. So this is like this, something like that. And notice that the mihrab, what shows the direction of prayer in the mosque, has usually in Iran inscriptions from the Quran written around it. In the Ketubah, you have, of course, biblical quotes or the wedding poem that I mentioned, but otherwise the conception is more or less the same. And actually, in some of the synagogues that survived in Iran today, this is synagogue in Isfahan, you can see the same pattern, yes, that is in the synagogue, with the inscriptions as well, again, Hebrew inscriptions. The same type of multifoil arch. This is arch with many like earlobes like this that you see, and they see that in the Ketubah here, okay? So it's clearly that this is the visual environment also on the carpets that we see. Another source of inspiration were illuminated Qurans, again, with all the prohibitions of Jews to touch the Quran or to study from it, or to, although they were forced sometimes to come to the mosque, they saw the manuscripts of the time and they imitated them. This is a Persian Quran that we see from the 19th century. And this is now, it's not only the Qurans that were influential, but Iran is the only country in the Islamic world, and maybe in the world anyway, that is not Jewish, that they illustrated marriage contracts, Muslim marriage contracts, Shiite marriage contracts in Iran were illuminated as well. So probably, I mean, not probably, definitely, I guess, there are contacts or there is a big influence between the two communities, because Iran, I forgot to mention, despite its poverty, the largest number of ketubot that we have from any land in the world is from Iran. Because almost every wedding in Isfahan, you had an illustrated ketubah. So because this was a popular custom in Iran of the time, in the Qajar period, the Muslims did it and the Jews, yes? I mean, so it's very interesting to compare. So this that looks like a Quran page is a marriage, Muslim marriage contract, Shiite marriage contracts. Of course, you can see it's not in Hebrew, yeah? Yes, I mean, you can see how it looks like the pages inside. And actually, we have marriage contracts, Jewish, that resemble almost identically the Shiite ones. Yes, you can see the bottom here, the Jewish contract, and this the Muslim one, and they are in the shape of a small book, yes, with pages. There is one on the exhibition that you can see later. This is the only country that we have ketubot or marriage contracts that are small books with several pages. These are the two opening pages that we see here in this slide. And here is a close-up of one that's from the collection of Benny. You can see how it opens with the wedding song, and then on the second page here on the left, song. is the beginning of the contract, the day of the week, and where it took place in Tehran, the names of the couple, Asher and Kaderet, and so on, and goes on. And the first 2 pages are the most highly decorated, and then the later pages are less decorated, but 2 more opening pages from another Ketubah from Tehran. You see the name of the city, for those who can read, Tehran, the Mata Tehran, the capital at the time when this Ketubah was produced. And then the later pages are like this, are simpler. And this is where the witnesses are signed at the end of the Ketubah. And you can see, by the way, for those who have good eyes, that this was prepared in advance. And then when the scribe filled the text, he did not even take attention of the space that was left to him. And so, for example, this phrase is written on the place of decoration because there was no other room. He wanted to finish, I guess, there. Anyway. So the first pages of this small books, Ketubot, are the most highly ornate. And if you remove the Hebrew from these pages, they would look like any Quranic page. Yes, I mean, this one is in Arabic on the left, this one is on the right is from a Jewish marriage contracts, but otherwise they are very much using the same aesthetics and the same design of the page and so on. And actually, this opening of the Quran as a term in Persian art, it's called sarlo, and we have to begin with this kind of decoration, and then only the text comes in. It's like welcoming the words of God with a nice display, with a nice decoration that shows maybe the harmony of the universe, everything is symmetrical, and so on. But you begin with that, and only then you continue with the text. So, and actually, this was again something that Benny discovered to me many years ago. There was an exhibition in Tehran just before the fall of the Shah of the Iranian wedding contracts, not the Jewish ones, and another exhibition that was some years ago in Singapore of the sacred art of marriage, Persian marriage contracts of the Qajar dynasty on the left. You see, published in the Islamic Arts Museum of Malaysia. And here are 2 pictures from this book, from the 2 books. That you see Shiite marriage contracts, long pages, unlike the small books, there are large pages like this. And again, how much they resemble the Jewish one. So on the right, you have a Jewish one, and the left, Persian one, a Shiite one. And the same aesthetics. I mean, again, for those who know Islamic art, they will identify this. I mean, the text is not in the center, it's to the side. And there is this panel along the right border, like here. And then you have the sarlo, as I mentioned, this opening at the beginning. And then every few lines have their own frame, and so on. All these aesthetics are also in the Jewish marriage contracts. Yes, you can see another Jewish marriage contract of the same type. What is the difference now, after I showed you how much they resemble the Shiite contracts? What are the differences? There are, and probably they point to Jewish sources that we don't have in the Shiite contracts. One very prominent difference, in the Shiite contracts, you never have any figurative images, animals or human beings. In the Jewish ones, you also don't have human figures, but you have animals, and plenty of animals. Like this too, it's very folkloristic. You can see it's like a child has drawn this, but still, if you love folk art, it's very significant. Between these 2 lines, for example, for this Ketubah from Kashan on the here, there is the sun, and the sun that is shining, and it says a verse from the Bible, Mizrach Shemesh ad Nevo, yes, from the coming of the sun till the place it's sunset, and making this like this is something Jewish, and we'll see the meaning in a second. Yes, I mean, look at these lions. I mean, anything modern artists would be happy with them. Or these ones, cute. And you see how prominent they are, or tigers. But the most prominent, or buffaloes, or I don't know what these animals are exactly. Yes, I mean, there are plenty of them in many Persian ketubot, and again, none of the Shiite marriage contracts has this, or pair of birds. This is the most common besides the lion. So why pair of birds? This is on your invitation for those of you who saw it. Actually, the earliest ketubot that we have with animals from Isfahan again have this pair of birds. Yes, we see the top over the arch here and here, the ketubah that we already saw before, or this one from Isfahan, early 19th century, the two birds at top. So what do they mean? It's or this one from Isfahan is all the illustrations around with either peacocks here or pairs of birds here all the way throughout the border. The reason is very simple. Yes, here's a detail of one. Okay, so the reason is very simple. While in Europe, you do the pictures of the bride and the bridegroom, like in this ketubah from the city of Padua in Italy. So you have the bride and the bridegroom here at top. So actually, we all use the term loving doves or loving birds. So instead of that, they could not do human figures. And so since the Middle Ages, in countries where human figures were avoided by the Jews, starting with medieval Spain, in Ketubot, we don't have human figures. You have this ketubah from the city of Tudela from medieval Spain. Again, I'll have to master this in a second. These two. And then after the expulsion from Spain, here is a ketubah from Salonika and the other one from Izmir. At the top of the contract, the bride and the bridegroom in this symbolic way. Or here from Tetuan in Morocco. You see one bird here, one on the other side. And definitely that's what it means. And that's what it meant also in Iran. At a certain point, the lions became to be more dominant, especially in Isfahan. And you see here these two ketubot with the lions and the sun in their back. Okay, here's a detail of that. Okay. These lions flank an element that is in the center, that has red in the center and green around it. What is this element that is so dominant and appearing on many ketubot of Isfahan from the second half of the 19th and early 20th century? Many controversies. Iranian Jews that they ask, you will give you one answer. Scholars will give you another. So for example, if you ask people from Iran that know the poetry, Persian poetry, they say, this is the symbol of the lover in Persian poetry. It's like a cypress tree that can move very easily, very peacefully. His body is like tilted in a very gentle way, and that's the symbol of that. Some say, no, this is the fire of love. Some others say, no, this is the paradise, and this is the tree of life in paradise. We have many explanations, and I cannot give you one that is, let's say, solid. Easier to reply is, what are these two lions with the sun in their backs? Humanized sun. You don't have human figures, but you have the sun with human face. So with the tree in the center, as you can see. This is much easier to reply because this is one of the most ancient symbols of Persian art. It's actually a national emblem from antiquity and appearing on ancient coins. By the way, here's another. Before we go to that element, look how popular it is, and sometimes you get variations. This is another ketubah, just to show you how popular it is in Iran from antiquity and Bukhara and the other countries. I take you to the Registan Square in Samarkand, where you have this great madrasa in the center there. And you look at the top section here of the madrasa, and you see these figures with the humanized sun in their back. Let me show you a detail, okay? And here is the ketubah. I mean, see how similar they are. Okay, so this goes back to antiquity, really, when this emblem appears in Persian, ancient Persian art, as the symbol of the kingdom, you can say, yes? And since the Jews of Isfahan claim that they founded the city, and Isfahan was the capital, maybe they picked this sign to show this like an emblem of the city. You see, it appeared in manuscripts and so on throughout the centuries. It was on the flag of Iran in the past, this emblem. And actually, here is bill of the 20 Zoom from Uzbekistan, 200 Zoom, I'm sorry. It has this element also. This, of course, I did not spend when I was there. I bought it home and I have it in my collection. Okay, so here actually a decree of one of the Shah in the Qajar period says, this Muhammad Shah Qajar, for each sovereign state, an emblem is established. And for the August state of Persia too, the order of lion, now he looks what's happening in the West, that every country has an emblem. So here too, the order of the lion and the sun and the sword has been in use, and a sign which is nearly 3,000 years old. That's at least what the art historians of the Shah told him in the 19th century. So it appears, for example, on Jewish amulets. And again, whether it's only the national emblem of Iran, why it would appear on amulet for childbirth? First of all, before even replying that, I want to show that we have national emblems on ketubot of other communities. Yes, for example, from Gibraltar, you have the crown of the British Empire here. And this one from Cochin in India, you have the Union Jack. And apropos the funeral of the Queen yesterday. Cochin was, under the British rule at this time, of course. And so they put this emblem, like we have in Judaism a prayer for the government, and there's like a prayer for the government that that gives the Jews a place to live. On Eastern Europe, you have, for example, the double-headed eagle on this Hanukkah lamp. Yes, the double-headed eagle here, that is the symbol of the Tsar. Okay, so that's what's common. But Eastern Europe can give us a clue to what's happening in Iran as well. Because sometimes in Eastern Europe, the double-headed eagle, which is a symbol of the Tsar, of the earthly king, on it is written the name of God. Meaning the real God, the real king is not the king of us today, but the king in heaven. And so in Iran also, sometimes you see the lion, on his belly is written Agla. Agla is a tag, is abbreviation for you are forever hero, my hero God. And by the way, Agla was a very well-known expression. It's used even in one of Rembrandt's etchings, for those who want to check that. Anyway, so the lion is not only the symbol of ancient Iran and the kingdom of Iran, but also of God, of the real king of the world. And sometimes even we see instead of next to the lions, a Kabbalistic element of this menorah with many sounds and the names of God to show that it's associated with God. Yes, it's amazing to have all these tiny decorations like we saw in the Geniza Ketubot are now crossed here between these two lions. Okay, the last community that I want to speak about is the Jews of Mashhad. And I'm showing you here a contract, and then purposely I did not write from which town it is, because it looks like any Shiite Muslim marriage contract. It's written in Persian according to everything that we mentioned. Okay, there is another page and from another one, also looks very much Shiite. Both of these are Jewish. Both of these are Jewish. Both of them, and this also, that are long page, and not only in the shape of the small books, are also Jewish. Also Jewish. They all come, all four that I've shown you, come from this, the holy city of Iran. It's like the equivalent of Mecca in Iran, Mashhad. Yes, the holy city. Jews came to Mashhad only in the 18th century, not before. And they came from Herbert, as I mentioned, Afghanistan, and settled there. Although the city is very holy and very devout and so on, and for Jewish minority, it was extremely difficult. The Shah brought them as merchants to Mashhad and gave them the professions that they're allowed to do, but they suffered extremely from the local population. So in 1839, let's say for a second with this, in 1839, there was a pogrom in Mashhad. I won't tell you now all the circumstances, what happened exactly. We know exactly what happened because eyewitness wrote in the description of the events. And as a result of this pogrom in the Jewish community of the city, there were about 400 Jews living in Mashhad at the time. the Jews were given the choice either to convert or to die. So they converted to Islam. There were many other conversions like this in Iran. Yes, but this is the most famous one because the others did not last so long or did not become so well known. So this community was forced to convert, but unlike other communities that converted and maybe became totally Muslims, they decided, the community decided to continue with their Jewish life in hiding. So to lead double life, as you might say. So, so for example, weddings in this community were at the age of 4 or 5. Why? Here, for example, this is a wedding in Mashhad. This is the bridegroom, this is the bride. Okay, if you can believe. That's it, it's in 1920, this maybe 8 years after the forced conversion, and their families around them. Why is that? Because if now there are Muslims supposedly in the street, but if a Muslim would come and want to take the Jewish girl for a wife, they will tell him she's already taken. And they would marry her as young as possible so that she's taken really. Okay, so that he cannot take her. Of course, they are only engaged and they will start to live together only when she will have her first period. So everything in life he was in hiding. For example, they would open their shops on Shabbat, but they would put one of the children in the shop. There were many of them were merchants. And if a Muslim would come to buy something, the child would tell him, my father is away, maybe come later, and the Muslim would wait and finally would go because the father never came back. And things like that. I mean, they had all these tricks that they did in their daily life. Yes, that they went to the mosque, but also they had synagogues in hiding. And they baked the matzot for Passover in the basement of their houses so that no one can see, and not even children, because children might by mistake, if Muslim asks them, do you eat matzot on now in this season? If the child would say yes, they would know they are Jews and so on. So they had many tricks of that to lead double life in everything, every stage of life. It's really amazing how much they were able to do that. Also they had double weddings. They had 2 weddings, one Shiite and one Jewish. Okay, so here's, by the way, a family. We see the bride again, Hakimyan family. The descendants live in Jerusalem. I know them very well. Okay. This is the fiancé, yes, the engaged woman, bride to be. Okay, so they would have double weddings, one Shiite wedding, Muslim wedding, as every wedding that could be in this society in that time, and they will have in hiding a Jewish wedding. So for each wedding, a contract would be prepared. So those that are in Arabic and Persian are for the Shiite wedding. How do we know these are of Jews? So for example, the bridegroom is called Jadid al-Islam. This is his title, a new Muslim. Like you have in Europe, a new Christian, Novos Christos, yes, in Portugal and Spain. So here is Jadid al-Islam. And they were called, by the way, they even called themselves the community of Jadidim in Hebrew, now making the plural, the community of the new Muslims. And so that's how we know. And also, when you look carefully, the signatures of the witnesses are in Hebrew. Yes, you see Shahadat, meaning in Arabic, witness, and the name is written, and they adopted, they had 2 names each one, like in the US in a way. Yes, I mean, they had the Muslim name and the Hebrew name. So here, for example, this witness in Hebrew letters, his name is written Abed al-Rahman. He has a Muslim name. He signed with his Muslim name because maybe he became well known to everybody by this name, but when they went to the synagogue, they were called by their Hebrew name. So in the middle of this Persian text, we have Hebrew signatures, which is amazing, yeah? And by the way, if Muslims would ask them, what is this, how you sign? Oh, they said, oh, this is our script we got from our parents and from our ancestors, and we don't want to change it. It's a secretive script of our people and so on, and that's how they would tell and explain this. But they, and we have Hebrew Ketubot as well. I mean, these are the Jewish marriage contracts for the Jewish wedding. We saw before for the Shiite wedding, These two are for Mashhad, for the Jewish wedding. Let me show you a close-up of one. Both of them are from the collection of Benny. And you can see the name of the city is written in Hebrew in clear letters. Bematad, the Mashhad. Yes, and then the name of the river. So they had these two contracts prepared. It's a lot of expenses, but they prefer to do, for example, a lot of expenses. They would buy to show to the Muslims that they are loyal to them. They would buy meat, non-kosher meat, so that the Muslims see them, that they come to the butcher and buy non-kosher meat. But then they would give it to the dogs and the cats and not eat it. I mean, they had all these kind of tricks of, we know a lot of this because these people immigrated to Israel and to London and other places and told us how it was before, until the Shah, the father of the last Shah, released them from all this in 1925. But until then, and even after 1925, there was still a pogrom in Mashhad. So in some few cases, we have the two contracts of the same couple, one the Shiite, one the Hebrew. And you can see how similar they are. They are, by the way, in two different collections. Yes, it's very, you know, you have a detective work to do. And you see that the decoration is almost identical for both, for this couple. Here is one, here is another. Two of the same couple. One the Hebrew one the Islamic one, and the Islamic one here is in the National Library has all the signatures of the witnesses here in Hebrew. Okay, so another thing that they did, and I'm almost toward the end, is that they did even the pilgrimage to Mecca. This Mashhadi, by the way, because they were Muslims, supposedly to the society, they became the wealthiest Jews in Iran. Why? Because they could move easily in Iran. They did not have the restrictions of other Jews in Iran. So they could do business anywhere they wanted, and some of them became very wealthy because of that. So they took advantage even of this in a way, in the genuine thinking. Anyway, so they had to do the Hajj because the pilgrimage to Mecca. And I want to show you this pair of tefillin that is in the Israel Museum today and was given by the descendant of this person that made the Hajj to Mecca with a tiny tefillin all the way from Mashhad to Mecca with tiny pair of tefillin under his turban. That's how he went to Mecca and came back. And today these tefillin are in the Israel Museum. So they went to Mecca and returned to Mashhad. And when the Zionist movement began, some of them immigrated to Israel. And I want to show you the synagogue of the Mashhadim in Jerusalem, not far from where I live. And this is the synagogue in Yerushalayim. And I want to show you the name of the synagogue. It was built in 1901, yeah, when the first Mashhadi Jews came to Israel. Bet Knesset Hajj Adoniyahu Cohen. Have you heard of a Jew that is Hajj? Hajj meaning someone who made the pilgrimage to Mecca. Yes, so, but that's how he became well known, this person, Adoniyahu Cohen. So it is the synagogue of Haji Eliyahu Cohen. Here is Bet Knesset Haji, it is another sign of it. La'adat Anusei Mashhad, of the community of the first converts of Mashhad that was dedicated by the family Cohen Aharonov, established in 1902. Okay, so to end the story, I want to show you that with the Zionist movement, some of these elements have changed in Iran, and we see the influence of politics also on the illustrations of this Ketubot. So if the lion in the past was the symbol of the authority of the kingdom of Iran, with the Zionist movement, in some Isfahani Ketubot, it was replaced by a Zionist symbol. Now this is the new king, you can say. So you have the Star of David, written Magen David, and the center of it, the word Zion, Zion. This element is, by the way, the Magen David, with the word Zion in it, that appears here 4 times in this Ketubah, 2, here, 1, 2, and here and here. If you go, here is a detail, okay? If you go to the old Persian neighborhoods in Jerusalem, you'll see this sign. This is Rehov Agrippas, the shuk, for those of you who know, in Jerusalem, where there was a community that was called Tzeirei Paras, the young men of Iran. And here is this sign as an emblem on the entrance to the houses. This house was built in 1933 in Jerusalem with this sign. And finally, I want to show you my student, today's professor, Orly Rachminian. And See, to end the story as Arthur has began, she married a Kurdish man from Zachor. She calls me, she wants a traditional ketubah. Her family is from Isfahan. And so I, of course, advised her, and this is the ketubah that they're holding in a wedding that was in Jerusalem a few years ago. So the story continues. Okay, toda rabba. Thank you. Okay, so any questions? Okay.
Thank you so much, Professor Sabar, for that incredible overview. We're now going to open the floor to some questions and also online to our audience. But I had a question just to start. I'm intrigued by the shape of the ketubah, and particularly the ones that seem to have the shape of, they're maybe on parchment, that have the shape
No,
of the
none of them is on
None of them
parchment.
are
They're
parchment.
all on paper.
So
yeah.
what about those that are tapered at the top, you know, that have the kind of pediment, the triangular sort of shape? It seems to me the shape of a piece of parchment.
No, in Iran, they never used parchment. It was too expensive, I think, to use to kill animal. They used paper. It's
all
illustrated.
Okay,
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
Right.
it's all illustrated. It's maybe the art is so good that they convince you it's a parchment.
Right,
But,
right. And do we know where the paper comes from? Is it?
yeah, some is like rice paper, and some of them that I didn't emphasize that, but have strips of paper around the ketubah to highlight the colors. They are in different colors. We know a little bit about the technique, but again, for those artists that came to Israel early on and were interviewed, they told us what they used. They tried, you know, these pages are very large, and you can see, so it wasn't so easy to get them, but apparently that was important for them. This to show, to get the best materials that they could. Any other
Questions from
questions?
the audience? One over here.
Yeah.
You said something about, oh, I'm sorry. You said something about the total number of the Mashhad Jewish community at 400, but it was much
Yeah,
more
at the
than
ti-
that
at
when
the
it
time,
was
at the
at its,
time of conversion in
but when was
1849.
it at its height, and what was
No,
the
not at the height. This is-
greatest number of Jews in Mashhad, when the number was at its greatest amount? When was that, and what was that amount, would you
I
say?
cannot tell you for sure, but it
Guessing.
was much larger than 400.
I would think.
Yeah, no, but this is the time, 1839. This is not long after the community was established. It was established, don't remember the exact year that they were invited by the Shah. I think it was 1750 something. I can't remember for sure. So it's not long after the community was established. So there were, according to this report that I mentioned, about 100 families, and we estimate 400 people altogether. He doesn't give exact numbers. He says about 100 families. The number increased later, for sure. You are right.
Okay, I had another
Yeah.
comment. It looks to me, and I'm sure I'm not the only one,
Mhm.
that when you see those, what we're calling lions, they are drawn with such a primitive, almost inept way of drawing.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm just thinking that maybe they just weren't good at representational art because that wasn't around them and they didn't have photographs to refer to, but they're not well drawn. They look like skinned seals. I mean, they just don't work.
Okay,
They're charming in their
okay.
way, but am I the only one who sees it that way?
Let me reply. You are talking to the wrong person because I love folk art. So this is folk art. You have to understand that I spoke about the poverty of these people. They didn't get education in good schools. The schools were extremely poor and so on. And none of them was educated as an artist. Those that were a little bit talented did this. None, let's say in the ketubot of the past, you don't have lines to draw the image and so on. They painted directly on the page. And since for every wedding there was a ketubah illustrated, they did not bother so much. Unlike Italy, where the family would contact an artist a year before the wedding, and they would search for the best artist in Jewish or even sometimes Christian in town to illustrate their ketubah. In Iran, there was never this situation. There are of simple people, many of them extremely poor. If you read about daily life, if you want, I can recommend to you even a novel to read by a descendant of one of these families that they interviewed their grandmother and tells of her childhood, of how poor these people were. It's like heartbreaking to see how they suffered the famine and in bad weather, how they suffered. There was no way of heating and how many people died and so on. And despite all this, they produced this, for me, wonderful and very joyous Ketubot, because if you compare it again to life, daily life, this is extraordinary in my opinion. So from this point of view, I disagree with you, because they are very colorful, they are very attractive, they show the joy of wedding, the one moment that you can be happy. Wedding was considered the most important event in the life cycle. You invest as much as you can, but still it's unlike the wedding of any that you know today, or even in other Islamic lands like Morocco or Iraq. They were a very poor community. Again, I have to repeat that. Yes, please. Yeah.
Question about.
Oh, it's mute that. Okay. Okay.
Online, so maybe get you after this question from over here.
Okay, so I get the next question. Hi, Shalom. Thank you very much. Thank you. It was a lovely talk. I was particularly energized by the examples that you gave in side-by-side examples of very shared iconography. My question is something of the reverse. I wonder if the different icons, different features, or different techniques allow you to also subdivide, to categorize different circumstances of the making of the ketubot. Are you able to subdivide them and identify particular techniques used or clustered in particular regions, points of time, or maybe even to conjecture, to hypothesize about who some of the makers were? Can you do something of a similar nature with particular ornamentation, particular modes of design? Might that tell us, or are you able to tell us something about the makers based on those clues?
What Josh is asking will be the next stage of research. I mean, before I started to look at this, there was very little, maybe 1 or 2 paragraphs written on these contracts. Now of course, we know more. The only way to do it, and this I already know, but the questions that you ask may be too detailed. The iconography, I know, I mean, from distance, I can tell from which town in Iran it is, because each town developed its own iconography, more or less. So you have the centers. I showed only 2, Mashhad and Isfahan, but the same is about Tehran. I didn't show you Kurdish Ketubot of Iran, from the city of Sanandaj, that they have their own style and so on. So we have local styles, like in Italy, by the way, that there are local styles of Rome and Venice, Modena, and so on. So you have that in Iran. They are different, but if the technique, I'm not sure. I don't know enough, but the iconography is definitely Isfahani Ketubah. You can identify from distance. It's not a problem. Yaz Ketubah are even more primitive than that person that has asked me. They are the most primitive illustrations, but when you read about life in Yazd, I mean, I'm amazed. There is a book of memoirs written like, you know, Pinkas of the community is written in Israel, or Yizkor book or whatever. And when you learn about 100 kids in one room learning together, things like that, it's heartbreaking. You see how poor the community was, and still extremely devout. The city of Kashan, for example, unlike Isfahan, unlike Mashhad, when they were also forced to convert, they said, kill all of us, we don't convert. Yes, I mean, so it depends really. There are these differences between the different communities in Iran. And of course, it influences the contract as well. But that's the next stage. Maybe one of your students would be.
We have one question over here.
Thank you, Professor. It's a fascinating talk.
Thanks.
You talked a few times about the poverty of the communities. And one way to make a marriage contract like this cheaper is to use printing. And was there any of the ketubot printed? Was there ever an urge to print, and compared to the hand drawing?
Okay, there was no Hebrew printing press in Iran until even our time, and so if they got printed ketubot, they came from Jerusalem. So we have few, and actually even the collection that were printed in Jerusalem and sent with the Shadarim, the emissaries from Palestine that came to Iran, brought with them a few copies, and they were written locally, but the document was printed in Jerusalem. We have few of these. In other countries, we have much more, many more. In Morocco, for example, and so on, where there are more contacts with the Holy Land. But also in Morocco, there was no printing press until 19th century. So that this option that you have in Europe was not available in Islamic lands.
Any hybrids between, some elements printed and some hand drawn?
Yeah, there is, because that's another topic of research or of interest to show how these examples printed from Jerusalem influenced the local Jewish arts. For example, the scene of the Akedah. Before the contacts with Jerusalem, there were no figurative images. When this came from Jerusalem with the binding of Isaac that was done in Jerusalem, they started to imitate it on the Kashan carpets. So you have Kashan carpets with images from Jerusalem transformed in a very interesting way. And this has become popular at that time because it came from the Holy Land. Anything that came from the Holy Land was holy from Eretz Israel. Anything that the Shadarim, the emissaries brought was, they would kiss their hands and their feet and would give them any money that they wanted to take back and so on. And there were also by the late 19th century, a Persian community in Eretz Israel, in the Holy Land. So they were also sending materials back. So that's how we start to see the change.
We have time for one more question, one or two more questions from online, from our audience online. So
yeah, thank you so much, Shalom. I should say there are about 130 people online right now, and they're all sending in their thanks for a wonderful talk, first of all.
Thanks.
So a couple of interrelated questions that have come up a few times online that I think follow on this last question have to do with whether it seems as though it was a common technique to create multiple ketubot with similar imagery or common themes, and then later have scribes fill in. So were the artists separate from the scribes, and were they pre-made as an artistic product and then applied, or were they custom made in every situation? And the interconnected question with that one is whether it appears that there are artists who are supplying illustration for both Jewish and Muslim marriage contracts in any cases. And does that help explain some of the similarity, or was it really a divided?
Okay, so let me reply. These are good questions. Someone who knows Ketubot for sure will ask this. Unlike Europe, again, I have to bring this example. For example, in Venice, we had workshops that were preparing Ketubot in advance, illustrating them, and then text would be added. It can be even added in Amsterdam or Corfu or somewhere else, not in Venice. In Iran, this wasn't the case. First of all, in all those that are signed, the scribe is also the artist. They are not professional. I mean, again, they did not look for high quality. So the scribe was also doing some decorations. And by the way, we know because the names are mentioned, I was able only in Isfahan to trace. It's one family that throughout the 19th century, father, son, for almost 70, 80 years, produced the Ketubot. Father, son, and they continued with the same motif, and that's why maybe many of the motifs are repeated and so on. So this is the situation. I mean, it's they're custom made, you can say, but for every wedding, they would prepare the Ketubah, maybe more than one a week. I mean, who knows? This was the largest community, by the way. Isfahan in the past was the largest community in recent times. In the 20th century, it's Tehran, but in the past it was Isfahan. So, and the other question, I don't think Muslim artists were decorating the Jewish Ketubot, but each community did their own, but they saw the others. I mean, at least the Jews saw the Muslim ones. I don't think the Muslim.
Where did they see them?
What? For example, those of Mashhad, they went to the weddings of their city friends and so on, and they lived they were in ghetto, but they still had they had friends especially the elite merchants and so on. They had friends in the Muslim neighborhoods, and they saw them. And I don't think the Muslims looked at the Ketubot because none of these motifs that I showed at the end, the lions and so on, that are coming from Jewish sources, I think, are in their contracts.
Well, thank you so
Okay.
much.
Yeah, we were invited to see the actual, not on the screen. It's better to see the real ones.